to call this meeting to order. This is our meeting on our SAP with our consultant. Thanks for being here. Let's go around the room and verify ourselves for the record.
Tim Steele.
Dick Training.
Pete Peterson.
Zig Burzen, Zico Consulting.
Alvin Thurn.
Mike Chadwick, Internal Audit.
Sal Parra, IT Director.
Ken Franco, SAP Project Manager.
Well, Zig, let's turn the timer to Elby's on her way.
Okay. All right.
So we'll get started.
We will go forward. So, kind of shorter list. Want to focus an awful lot on some of the recent things that are happened in the last couple of weeks. So we'll talk about project progress, delivery gaps, the impending checkpoint, an update to running cost, and then we'll remind us about the critical success factor number 20, which was to define success and what we think the outlook is. So we have changed our picture here for project progress. Things are getting a little persnickety right now, so there's an awful lot of pressure on the team to move forward. The Executive Steering Committee dashboard was presented on Tuesday. I think the key thing here is that the Executive Steering Committee has...
I think I'm going to tell you, these are scrimming the right pictures. Get those of us that are bald. You got to get this off of here.
Sorry. I'll make sure we fix that. I think the key message here is that the Executive Steering Committee was informed Tuesday that the project condition is red. And the meaning of red for the Executive Steering Committee is that this is urgent, corrective action is required immediately, executive oversight is required. Okay, so the project has moved from yellow to red. I think you can see the comments up there are the SAP team is slipping in all areas, inclusive of the data, the human capital and Philo, as well as the development coding pieces. They still moves forward, but it's becoming a troubled situation. The project team itself, in their Wednesday project management office meeting, this is basically a trend, from the very beginning, from April when the realization phase began. You can see that they also are presenting the fact that virtually all of their project components are in a red condition. The other thing I think we need to highlight is that we've lost some visibility in a couple of line items. They used to have those line items there, and they basically kind of combine those in with other areas. Here's a reminder for you. This is the 30th week of the project, so in essence you have gone to right at the halfway point. It used to be a 55-week contract. If you recall, about a month or so ago, they added 3 weeks. So it became a 58-week contract in the statement of work, and we're halfway there. So we need to be real serious now about how much we've spent and how much we've got left in terms of finishing this project up. This bar chart, as far as we're concerned, doesn't really reflect reality. I mean, it's basically telling you that the realization build is completing at the end of November. That's not true. Okay? It's saying that there's a lot of training work, and the last time I was here, we talked about the fact that there was some great difficulty in getting resources for the OCM team so they could start developing training material. They're struggling with that. The latest news I received just this morning is that the RFP for getting those resources has been canceled. That's going to create more delay. I think that Alden has identified an alternate method or approach to accomplish that, which is good news. But we need to recognize that this story here is not really where we're at. So the bottom line, as far as the progress is concerned, is that the team is facing some fairly difficult decisions that have to be made. They are in the process of doing that. It's going on. But they've really got to resolve what the scope is of what they're going to have in place that they're literally going to use for the systems integration testing cycle 1. So that's got to be resolved, and that's in the air right now. Then they also have to figure out, well, what's going to be ready for the cycle 2, which is probably, that right now, according to their plans, is mid-January. Cycle 3, in their plans, is March. And then there's this other question of, is there or should there be anything at all in the project from a scope perspective that needs to be deferred beyond July 1? We already know for a fact that there is one particular set of results that are going to be beyond July 1, and that's the CAFR report. There's 10 reports. You don't even need the CAFR report until spring of 2018. Okay? Also, the administration really has some difficult decisions to make regarding what, if any, additional funding is going to come to you from the administration with regard to some of these changes that are now happening over the next few months.
Let the record reflect that we've been joined by our chairman, Senator Johnson. Welcome, ma'am. Any questions from Assembly members where we're at so far?
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about some delivery gaps. This is a slide that now, this is the third time that I have presented this slide to you. In October, we were talking, the plan was, okay, at the end of October, the realization build phase was going to complete. Then a few weeks ago, I was here and we said, oh, the plan was November the 28th. I would suggest to you that there is no way that the organization is going to be able to finish realization build by November 28th. It's looking more and more to me that it'll be mid-December. Might even, might be later than that, but certainly that's a much more reasonable target. But that means you're starting to add time now to the project. Contractually, this was just a reminder of all the things that are supposed to be included as part of the have we finished realization build, can we now move on to testing? So what happened? I guess I would suggest to you that it's almost like a perfect storm. And you've kind of heard stories about two different storms coming in together, and what that does is it accentuates the waves because they end up happening at the same time. So an awful lot of things have, in essence, kind of come together in a funnel, and they basically hit the project team at one time. And this is kind of a list of what those are. I mean, the Philo team, was expecting to not have to do as much work because so much of it had been done earlier in the first cycles of the project. They miscalculated. I mean, so they've had to redo an awful lot of work. The back office team, which is the data team, they really didn't consider the non-PeopleSoft data early in the activity. And so it's been kind of added as they go along, and that's stretched out their efforts and their activities and slowed down this whole data migration piece. Yes, we talked earlier about the fact that MOA dragged its feet a little bit earlier in the project. They have really stepped up to the plate in the last month or two, so I think that's good news. But early on, things kind of dragged a little bit. The HCM team all of a sudden is finding more things are breaking and they have to fix them, so it's just adding to their timeline, which is why they've said, oh gee, we're in red again. They were doing quite well for quite a while. But the other thing that we need to remember about the HCM team versus the Philo team is the number of RISEs is significantly different in terms of those two teams, and there are fewer modules on the human resources side than there are on the Philo side. Just recently, the infrastructure is something that the organization is relying on the outsourcing of SAP. They're providing the hosting service, if you will. So right up here, and it's referred to as HEC, which means the HANA Enterprise Cloud, and that's the SAP private cloud hosting service. They provide the infrastructure. Well, that was what everybody decided to do months ago. One would think and one would hope that SAP would know how to put together their own infrastructure and provide it in a timely manner. They simply have not stepped up to the plate. They've had some delays. Computers have not been available. If you don't have the computers available and the servers available in order to do testing and to do data load, you can't do the data load. I mean, so that's been, as of today or last night, I mean, all of a sudden we have the computer, and now all of a sudden the data load folks can continue their work. But Unfortunately, it's cost them 3 weeks. And then the thing we gotta remind ourselves, we've talked about this, I mean, you're coming up to the end of here, and all of a sudden, we've got this requirement that an awful lot of the SAP folks need to be off-site rather than on-site because of the whole IRS rulings regarding is this person an employee or not an employee, you can't really be here physically the entire full year and that sort of thing. That's happening at the same time. So all these are some of the things that have kind of all hit in this time period.
Question from the semi members on that page? Any question?
Can't they just say I'm going on vacation to Alaska?
Well, I mean, don't get me wrong, they're working, it's just that they're remote, okay?
So Zig, you were saying on the first one, the file team miscalculated. They were counting on old data that had been done or old procedures. What happened? It was bad data?
It was just, my understanding is an awful lot of it was incomplete, okay? It's just simply incomplete, and they had an expectation that quite a few of the activities were properly and completely configured, that the RICEFs and all that kind of thing had been appropriately documented and designed, and as they went back and started looking at all of it, they just discovered that they were not
Who
complete.
was the contractor? Do you remember that did that work for us? Was that?
It was a combination, so you had Black and Veatch step 1, and then you had Peloton step 2, okay?
Thank you. Please continue.
Sure. So what's been the impact of this? The team will not be able to complete the realization phase by 11/28. Unless corrective action is taken, the target go-live date for 7/1 is in jeopardy. Now that's my opinion, okay? Now I also have a reminder up here that the payroll activity needs to start early. So when you say 7/1 for a system go live date, you got to recognize on 6/19 you got to start collecting time for payroll. It's 2 weeks prior to. So you're actually the system's really got to be available earlier. Okay.
Alden?
Just as a reminder, we still have a 3-week buffer built in, or available, I guess is a better terminology, to still be able to meet the 6/19 schedule without modifying any of the other testing schedules in the future. If you remember, we had a 6-week buffer between with the 55-week ended. We added 3 weeks, which went from 6 to 3, but we still have a 3-week available opportunity between, because right now, if we met our timeline right now, we would be at the end of May, I think May 29th or something like that. So we do have a potential 3-week buffer. We're certainly using some of that up. We've used some of it, but I just want to make sure people are aware we still have we weren't running right up against the last date. From a schedule available standpoint, from a financial standpoint, certainly there are considerations that have to be taken into consideration on there, but on a schedule standpoint, we do have a little bit of a buffer still there.
Mr. Steele?
Yeah, I think we knew that the data was not in the proper shape, and we made a conscious decision in order to keep progress moving, to set that aside to go on. The trouble is then to go back and say, oh, should we come up over? My concern is that when we start slipping schedules, we start having another huge impact on the budget in terms of the workspace. We're scheduled to drop that out of the budget and personnel. And so we're going to have to look at the budget ramifications over here.
And with regards to data, Mr. Steele, half of the data that we're trying to bring into SAP is not in PeopleSoft. That's been one of our biggest, and it's all of our core functionality. The departments over periods of time have taken data out of PeopleSoft and used Excel spreadsheets and other tools available to them to be able to perform the functions of their job as PeopleSoft has gotten farther and farther away. Well, as a part of this project, we have to bring that information that's been external to PeopleSoft back into SAP, or we will not have any advancements in those particular areas. The non-PeopleSoft information has been what's been having the most impact to our schedule.
One quick question along this line. What do we have to ensure that the people we use SAP and not try and also use Excel or something else after we close? You're gonna pray
Mr.
or
Trini,
what?
I don't know how I can answer that. I mean, I think that's the expectation of the administration, that a lot of time and effort has been put into this system to deliver the functionality that every department needs to have, and I would hope that every director and every supervisor would, when they have a tool available to them that provides the functionality that they need, that would be their goal to be able to do that.
So our
To use
IT
it.
should be able to tell if Excel is being used in the system.
No, I don't think our IT department would be able to know whether Excel spreadsheets are being used external in any functional area. I think that would be something that those departments themselves would have to be able to admit to or to bring up. There's no tracking of Excel spreadsheets.
Ms. Jackson?
Great, Jeff. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, what you're talking about is shadow files, and folks have been using shadow files for a lot of years.
A lot of years.
So the fact that, we got, well, you have to bring in all those employees, all
And
their shadow
utilities,
files.
by the way, as well.
Well, yeah, no, I'm talking about all the employees of municipalities.
Yes.
Yeah, that's major. And so,
We used to use it.
And there
it's
was
troubling.
And there was a tremendous
Thank you,
amount of
Mr.
work by prior vendors to bring that information in, and it was all customized, and a lot of that we're not using, so we have to spend a little bit more time to be able to bring it through. But a lot of work was spent in the past on data, and very little of that, if any, has been usable for us going forward. Now, I will say the information that's been within PeopleSoft has been pretty solid, and they are able to get at that relatively easily. It's been the delays to the non-PeopleSoft data that has kind of had the biggest impact on data.
Mr. Steele, sir?
That shouldn't be able to hurt the completion of the project. It just reduces the functionality of it until they catch up and get it in.
The data, Mr. Steele, here's how it basically works. You're configuring the system, and then you have to test it. But you have to test it with the data that you're currently doing. So, yes, we are working on getting it configured, but without data, there's nothing to test.
Well, that could be, you're right.
Unless you make it up from scratch, which I've been trying not to do to the greatest degree possible. But it's unfortunate that you have to have the data and the system combined to be able to do the testing, and the data we're a little bit farther behind than we would like.
I'm just concerned that if we just continue the project, that it can go on forever. And at some point, you say, yeah, the system is there and works, but all the data is not in it. Therefore, folks get to work, get the data in it. But that can be done with the resources in-house, I would presume.
I can assure you that the municipal staff on data have been working their tails off and have met practically every single requirement to be able to do that. What we are struggling with is the vendor able to load that data into their tools and be able to put it into the system for
And to
testing.
be
It
able
has
to test
taken
it.
longer than what they had budgeted.
Go ahead, Zig.
Okay. So the last comment here, it basically says if you need to take some corrective action, if you've got these issues, well, there are only three things you can do. I mean, you can adjust your schedule, you can adjust scope, or you can adjust your resources. So let's talk about this whole scheduling change. If the team delays the go-live date, you got to recognize that you're immediately into this issue of needing to start in a quarter. So any kind of delay for the system beyond 7/1 pushes you to 10/1. You need to be aware of that. Needless to say, that kind of delay probably becomes very untenable politically. Okay? And we need to recognize that if you make that kind of delay, you're going to be adding some money, as you said, Mr. Steele, to the project budget. The other thing to be careful of, I think, if this would become the next major delay, an awful lot of the team members, I think, would give up. I mean, they're going to get sick and tired of this scourge. Okay? And the other thing to realize is if you have that kind of a delay, you're going to lose your contract resources as well. Okay? So they're going to go off on some other project, and you get into this whole business of I've got to train them and I've got to start up, and you get into all those ugly things that you've been through once already. Okay? So scheduling changes is probably not a good idea. changing resources to make the 7/1 go live date. You can certainly add resources, but you got to realize that you just about used all the MOA resources, the Muni resources, as much as you possibly can. You're not going to find too many more there. All right. Adding contract resources, of course, you're going to immediately get into, I'm going to have to spend more money. And you've got to recognize that there's a practical limit to resource additions. I mean, right now, I think the team can probably add developers, but it's not going to make much sense to add more subject matter expert folks that are here. So you got some limits on how much you can do that. You've also got to recognize the kind of money that's involved when you start doing that. So you can change scope. This is probably the most likely thing that makes sense and still get a 7/1 go live, still get success, okay? So you focus on making sure that the core activities of the system are going to go live and be there. Then you can look at what are some of the things that you can defer. And I already mentioned the whole idea that you really don't need to focus on getting the CAPRA reports ready. You don't need to. I mean, you're not going to use those reports until the end of 2017, which means it's got to be ready in the first quarter of 2018. So there's an example. The other things that you could potentially defer is the entire enterprise content management activity. Okay, that's all the scanning and storing of documents. I mean, you're not doing it today. You can certainly continue doing it for a few more months after go live, rather than allocating resources and energy on that now. Okay, so those are some examples. But I think you need to recognize that if you do something like that, you will need to avoid the mistake that the Muni made, I think 10 or 13 years ago when you put in PeopleSoft. Because that's what happened with PeopleSoft. You deferred reporting. Okay? And I'm suggesting you without, other than the financial statements, I mean, you can defer reporting as well. Okay? But if you do that, I'm sorry?
Mr. Jackson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So let's talk a little bit about the financial statements, and they don't need to be ready until whatever you said. But I'm sure you're taking into consideration all the requirements that we have in terms of our financial statements and grant reporting,
Sure.
and due dates.
Sure.
Because that's
Yeah,
a whole
you'll
other,
see that. I mean,
that's
I've
a whole
already-
other side.
Yeah, and I've already listed the fact that you got to have your mandatory
Okay.
stuff, you got to have your financial reports. I'm not suggesting all reports at all, okay? So that's not my message.
Okay, thank you.
So, but again, I think the key thing is to recognize we don't want to make that same mistake. We don't want to defer and then basically find ourselves with people saying they can't get their reports, and then there was a tremendous mess that the Muni went through with that because the Muni didn't fund the follow-up work. So if you do this, I mean, if you're going to go down this path, you really have to have a commitment from the administration and from you that says, oh, we're going to need some additional funding. We're going to move this beyond 7/1, and then we're going to go ahead and fund it and take care of it and get it done. I think it can be done in about 5 months. Okay? So we're going to come back to that and talk a little bit more about it, but I wanted to at least talk a little bit more about this impending checkpoint. This is contractual. We've talked about this the last time I was here. You have this major go, no-go checkpoint coming on, which says, we finished build, we can now test. And it requires Alden's signature. He's got to sign off on this thing. Okay? So, I've looked at the contract. Page 18 has got the exit criteria, which is the criteria that has to be met in order to say we have finished realization build. Okay? So those are the words from the contract that literally identify that. I mean, that gets us into this long list of here are all the RICEFs, if you remember the RICEFs. Okay? These are the RICEFs. Workflows, reports, interfaces, conversions, enhancements, and forms. Referred to as RICEFs. Well, here you have the RICEFs for Philo. You can see they have 188 of them. Human capital, there's 171. Each one of those needs to be developed, unit tested, and functional unit tested before you can say it's finished, okay? Well, ready for testing as of the Wednesday report, Philo said they had 18 ready for testing. Human Capital said they use a number of 99% or something. I kind of calculated a number here, but you know, they're pretty close. So Human Capital is probably going to be in pretty good shape within the next week to 10 days or 2 weeks. They'll have all their stuff pretty much ready. Clearly, Philo, the financial team can't really get anything, cannot get all that done by 11/28. Okay? That's what's going to roll into December.
Question from Sunday members.
At some point, and then maybe after Zig is through, I'd like Alden to kind of scope out his plan in terms of what is.
The 20th is coming soon.
They were focusing this week on making massive improvement on the Philo side. This was the week dedicated to functional unit testing. So next week, when the report comes out, I know it's 30 right now. I mean, just since this is a pretty old, but I'm not going to say that 30 and 188 is a big difference. I mean, there's still a lot of work to do. This is the week they're focusing on functional unit testing. So we're expecting to see some large increases on those numbers here by the end of the week.
I want to make sure that you don't think that I think it's your fault. I think that there was a problem that we had when this administration came in that we're still dealing with.
And this area here goes more back to anything else to the prior vendor information we were talking about, because Philo's been, HCM, if you remember, a lot of that is brand new stuff, the new time system, all of those kind of things. So that was all developed from scratch. The Philo team has been the ones who's been heavily engaged in trying to find their way through the work that was done by the prior, and that's kind of a direct result of the numbers you're seeing.
Well, 30
there
is
as well.
still a little short.
Okay. Now, we need to recognize that all of this has to be done, but we've also discussed the fact that you've got to have the data so that you can do testing. That's a piece that's not shown here. Okay. We also, you know, in the contract there's entrance criteria, what it has to be in place in order to begin testing. This is the statement that's on page 18 of the statement of work. It basically says, go get the criteria elsewhere. All right? So I got the criteria. Don't expect us to go through the detail here, but this is the data. Entrance criteria does exist for beginning testing. I mean, this is where we get into, and here's an interesting one that I do want to highlight for you. If you see that one right there, it says data conversion, development, and testing have been completed, and data load errors are less than 1% of converted data. It's got to be in place in order to conduct systems integration testing. It's a big deal. And that's what we were talking about earlier. That's what Alden was talking about. That's what's taking time. That's what's on the critical path. That's where we didn't have infrastructure and had a 3-week delay. I mean, on and on and on. Okay? That's a big piece. Needless to say, it's important that Alden have understanding that that is met before he signs off on the entrance criteria. Before he accepts the fact that we can go forward and start testing. What that means is that whatever time is required to finish RISYS and finish the data loading, you've pushed systems integration testing to beyond that point in time. Okay?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So if they have a certain number of items that are ready for testing, could they start testing on those items? They all have to be ready to do it.
Got to do it all at once. You can't really test an individual item because the purpose of this is systems integration testing. In other words, the unit testing is all about each individual item. Now you're saying I've got to link it all together. And that's the serious piece, and that's the piece that's.
The
has to-
testing that's going on, the functional unit testing is what is, they're currently testing
doing that
every
now.
individual piece to make sure that that the consultant agrees that what they blueprinted, what they've asked to be configured matches to the actual thing. And then you take 100 of those from the employee gets hired till they get retired, for example, and how all they get paid and all those things to make sure they're all interrelated. That's what the SIP 1, 2, and 3 is meant to accomplish.
Thanks.
Any other question? Go ahead.
The problem is the contractor has a contract written such that you have to sign off. If you can't sign off, then
We have the ability of making exceptions to that
Yeah.
whole list. It's not a, it is what the contract says, but we have the choice as the administration to say, all right, you're at 3% instead of 1%, and we're gonna move forward with that, and that's acceptable, as long as you do X, Y, Z to help
they
mitigate that.
don't want to get at the end and we say, hey, you didn't do the job, we're not going to pay you. And you don't want to get at the end and say, hey, this damn thing didn't work.
And where's the rest of what you owe me?
Right. So that's why it's important to recognize, and this addresses your question. There's a two-step process. The first one is a conditional acceptance. And that conditional acceptance says, okay, we buy off, but it says with the following exceptions. So you do document those exceptions. You do document those. You do say, this isn't ready. Okay? And you come back to those. Okay? And then you have to have the summary of conditionally accepted items. That gets into that list of all the RICEs. Okay? Then you have the final acceptance. And again, here it's very specific in terms of, has all the criteria been met? Work products are listed. Then you can say it's closed. I bolded this line item here. The program management plan has two very specific acceptance documents. One is for the build phase, and the other one is for the testing phase. What I found rather interesting is that the testing phase expects Alden to sign off on not only the exit criteria, you finish testing and I accept that it's good, but it also has the entrance criteria. And quite frankly, I find it odd. Why would you be asking for entrance criteria acceptance well after the fact that you've completed testing? It should be part of the exit criteria of the build phase. Make sense? That's why I bolded that.
Alden, one thing, on the 28th, when you sign off on this, if you do, I want what you send to SAP to be sent to Assembly members, so we're not wondering, did Alden sign it off on the 28th? So I expect an email on the 28th.
Don't be expecting a signed thing on the 28th.
Everybody gonna sign it, Alden. We want to know. Thank you.
Okay, I did do an update on the run rate. I didn't do an update on the monthly cost because it's not too much different than what you saw 2 weeks ago. But here is now October is the full October amount. I basically said, okay, well, how much from a contractor run rate perspective? These are the charges that have been calculated off of time reports and off of expense reports for all the contractors. So this is theoretically what's being spent, although we need to remember it's not reflected in PeopleSoft exactly this way. If you recall, there are some issues where we haven't paid some invoices, we've got some of those kinds of things going on, and there's an understatement in PeopleSoft right now. However, so if you add all these up, you get 10,000,005. Okay? So that's basically where you're at. And remember, you are at the 50% mark of the organization. Now, as you go later into the project, one would hope that this almost $400,000 per week would start dropping off. Probably won't for the next month for sure, because you're going to have a lot of developers working on this thing. And one would hope that it would start dropping off. Because if it doesn't drop off, if you continue at that run rate, you can all do the numbers, real easy, right? If you're halfway through and you're at $10 million, it's pretty easy to say I might be at $20 million fairly quickly. Yeah, 21, yes, thank you. So just letting you know, okay? So the last time I was here, we talked about, the critical success factor is define success, and we use because it is Thanksgiving, okay, you do some shaving, on your turkey, and you might be able to refine what your scope is. So this slide we used last time, and the whole focus of this thing was to kind of talk about the statement of work, what's included in the statement of work with SAP, and what seems to be on the outside periphery. You need to make sure you figure out how to address that and handle that. But I wanted to talk a little bit about, well, let's refine this thing. Let's take a look at this thing from a perspective of what do you really want to have when you go live. Okay? So you can conceivably defer ECM. That's why I put a slash through there. You can defer the Muniverse activities and say, fine, I'm going to use the SAP portal, and I can maybe defer and do that stuff because it's a very reporting-oriented type of an activity. The whole issue of reporting, or maybe I can defer an awful lot of the business warehouse, business intelligence type of activities. Maybe. I'm just saying those are possibilities. You have some reports that definitely are not funded. There was this exercise of about 32 reports that were not funded, were not in the scope of the SAP contract. Those are all sitting out there, and so that becomes an obvious possibility of just deferring those. And then, if you look at the RICEFs, the statement of work talks about the RICEFs. I put a slash through the R there because those are the reports. A good portion of those reports potentially can be deferred. So I'm thinking of it as maybe Horizon 1 and Horizon 2. Horizon 1, here's everything that you really need to have to make sure you go live. I mean, you got to be able to pay people, pay vendors, process all the HR activity. You got to make sure you meet the mandates out there, absolutely. And then you've got to be able to conduct accounting, report financials, track projects, track grants, and provide queries. Okay, and I think if you've got all that, the Muni can basically say, we have success, we have implemented, we have gone live with the SAP system. So politically that's sound. It also means that you don't get into requesting and spending more money than you maybe already have allocated, except for some of the things that are still hanging out there in the weeds and need to be resolved. But not a big deal. Okay? Then you say, fine, Horizon 2 are some things that I can maybe push off and call that. But if I do that, I need to basically create that as a separate project. I need to get funding for it. I need to get commitments. I need to recognize what that is so that it happens. Otherwise, if it doesn't happen, things continue to get pushed out, and all of a sudden you think you can do it with just your in-house staff, and you get into trouble making that happen, which is exactly what happened with PeopleSoft. Okay? So the conclusion is Horizon 1 represents success. You have the system go live on 6/19 for time collection. You have the system go live for transaction processing 7/1. Horizon 2, I would suggest, begins within the month, probably 3 or 4 weeks later, within a month of go live, and targets a completion for Thanksgiving of 2017. Okay? It's doable.
Are those in-house projects for the most part, or do we have to call back the contractor?
I think you probably end up with a small SAP team. I think you could probably run it with an internal project manager. Sorry, Ken.
That's fine.
But you can probably run it with an internal project manager, but you probably need SAP resources for the ECM component. You probably need SAP resources for the BWBI component. Okay, and the teams are probably in the vicinity, because currently you have about 3 for each group. So there's 6 people. So somewhere in that vicinity, and what that represents is about $3 million. Okay? And then it does include those 10 CAFR reports. So,
That's great. Johnson has a question, sir.
oh, I'm sorry.
Can you
Should I go
hear?
back to that one?
No, but I've been wanting to ask this question, throughout as long as you've been presenting, especially with these photos. Is that your dog in there? Thank you.
It's his dog, Ellie.
Hey,
Well,
some
I
likeness.
had a dog that had a shaved head.
Alden, have you looked at page 28 in here? Page 30, on his horizons 1 and 2.
Oh.
Have you thought about that?
Well, I don't get to see these things ahead of time, so no, I have not looked at it. Two, I don't agree 100% with those things that are up there. For example, ECM is only a $400,000 stream. It's a separate stream, and we've also, all the workflows for purchasing AP and ER are already been developed that they're going to be using with the assumption that ECM is a component of that. So while it's not a huge dollar amount, it's a separate stream, not impacting any of our core consultants. It's also been blueprinted and designed to have that component there. So that would be one where I'm like, I don't think we can make that work. The CAFA reports, there's probably some validity to that. I mean, and as well as some of those other reports. Now,
We'll need those, we'll need CAP for 2018.
but you wouldn't want to wait forever because you've got the resources on staff right now in those areas that know developing our system and know where all of it's coming from. So they're the best case scenario people to put those CAPers together from a time and energy. Because any new person coming in who's not been on a project, you're going to spend more time and money to get them up to speed on what those reports need to say. So it'd be best to use the people we have. However, we do not need a CAFA report on go live date July 1st, 2017. That is a true statement. So that there is some potential flexibility on that particular one with a few of these other ones. But there are some things I would disagree with, but there are some things in here that we would have as opportunities for modifications if we are unable to deliver the system as we have promised, which is still my first goal.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. So, the recommendations then are, I think the team needs to reconstruct whatever they're going to deliver on 7-1. Certainly Alden needs to hold SAP to its statement of work. I'm suggesting that he conducts random spot checks of each rights of object by work stream in terms of the detailed products, and I would suggest that he be looking at about 10% of the items. That should cover it. Okay? And then I certainly think the administration needs to commit to any kind of follow-up. If there is a follow-up project that's defined, you need to commit to it, you need to fund it, and do it rather than falling into the trap that happened with PeopleSoft 10 years ago. Okay?
Question or something, or Mr. Zig?
Not for Zig, if I may, Mr. Chairman, but I want to ask Val, if you have any comment you'd like to make. I can always read your body language. Now's your opportunity.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Jackson. I think I would add some context to what you've heard. And the context is, do you have a system that is built? You think of an engine or you think of some other scenario, you build a system and then you have to run it for a while for it to be stable, for you to work out the kinks, and then you make enhancements or improvements to it. So, standard operating process for a massive engine that we are building for the community right now, which is SAP, is you have a certain period of time which we call stabilization. When you're stabilizing the system, you're doing things, tweaks to it, it's not going to run perfectly out of the gate when you go live. And that stabilization period, depending upon the situation, could be anywhere from 3 months to 2 years. Now you have to define what stabilization is, fair enough. But the context I would give you is that if there's any consideration of doing anything post-go live, you want to do it when you're reasonably certain that you've got an engine that's working pretty stable. So you have a decision at some point to say, is it better off to have a well-functioning engine, perhaps 3 months later than you planned, or do you have an engine that's not functioning very well, and then you wait 6 months or 18 months based on how well it's functioning, and then you do your enhancements. This is all falling into the conversation which is post-go live, what is our world gonna look like? But I would be very hesitant to have a conversation where there's a phase 1 go live, followed very shortly by a phase 2, which has got some enhancements in it. Because we're gonna go through a period of stabilization, and we're gonna pay a lot of money for stabilization for a few months, and we won't know whether it's just 3 months or it's actually 6 months in our world, or is it a year? Hopefully not a year. So that was one piece of feedback I have, and my recommendation would be you've got a really good shot at getting it right this time. So get it right. And get a win for the Muni, because it's high time the Muni has this win. We've made mistakes, we've learned from our mistakes for the last 5 years of how we've chosen to invest. I would ask that we make investment choices now when we're 50% through. Make some good choices to get us to 100% and have a good product at the end of 100%. And I'm not in favor of having a phase 2 post go live. You will have plenty of phase 2, I can guarantee it right now. You'll have a lot of enhancements, and you'll be funding for many years going forward to build on what is actually a fantastic system. Once you understand it and once the community uses it, you will be committing, and I'm just putting out based on what I've talked with other public sector entities about, $2 billion every year for enhancements. So, but those will be business driven, those will not be fixes, those will be functional improvements to the community. They will be identified, and you guys can make the choice on whether you fund them. But other organizations are consistently investing on this platform because they're building it out. It is a platform. So that's.
Chair Jackson,
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Steele?
Well, I agree with you. We need a functioning system, we need some experience with it, and we need to make sure that it's working. In some respects, we probably have an opportunity here with our enterprises set up the way they are as somewhat separate entities. But I don't want to wait forever to get them in there either. But I can see, we added a whole nother dimension of complexity when we added those in. And I think we need to get a successful system. Plus, our finances going forward are not all that clear. And so we need to do something. We need some success, and it would be really nice to be able to tap a functioning system. That's what
Mr. Jackson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to make one comment that both you and I are aware of. You know, when PeopleSoft went live, I mean, what Val just mentioned is exactly what happened with PeopleSoft. You know, it was an engine that was working pretty well, but we had to deal with enhancements throughout the project and other things. And one of the mistakes that I think that was made back then was none of the upgrades occurred. So
Get the engine off the train.
anyway, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
My concern with SAP is, we're gonna have to maintain the systems. I don't wanna go back to PeopleSoft. Where we create it, get it working, then we don't fund it. The enhancements, because then we go back to PeopleSoft. You got anything?
Well, it just seems that if when we go live, we're still not quite ready to go live. It seems like we always will be behind trying to play catch up. So hopefully everything will actually be ready when we finally decide to go live, and let's hope that is that one.
So, we got 7 minutes left, sir. Do you wanna?
Just a couple of comments, I think, to kind of summarize here. You know, the project is red right now, and the project, the way they put those colors in is it's based upon them getting their work done by November 28th. You know, if we gave them 3 more months, then we'd be green all the way down the whole thing. So I just want to put a little context to that. That the reason why it's red is they're trying to meet a project plan based upon the 28th of this particular month. So that's one aspect I want you to be aware of. While we are making good progress, it's just that they don't believe that they can deliver every one of those components by November 28th. And I think we all are in agreement with that, and we're going to work on that. And I think what also hearing from myself, and I know from the administration, is in the past, they tried to cut corners and go into the next phases without really being ready to go into the next phases. And we're not interested in that. I know the municipal staff is very sensitive to that and said, don't put us down the path that we've been through before by rushing things in and so forth. So you're not going to see us get a 50% system in on November 28th just because we're trying to hit November 28th. That's not our goal. We do not want to go into the next phase and fail or have a lot of defects and so forth. So that is something that we're very cognizant of. We want to make sure that when we go in, we're where we need to be, and that the municipal staff have the faith that we're going to that next step because we're truly at that step and ready to go into it, and not that we're just doing it because we're hitting a specific date. So just know that that's the case. I think when we meet next month, we're going to have a really good idea of how, what's happened over these next few weeks, how we delivered. I mean, we have a functional steering committee meeting at 1:30 where SAP is going to present to us what they're the ones who took it red, so they have to present what their mitigation solutions are to get it out of red, and what those dates might be, and what the work and what they're going to do as far as staffing and all those kind of things. So I think we're being honest and reflective of where we are right now, shooting for the 28th date. We know what our challenges are. Now we're going to figure out how we're going to rectify those challenges. The dates are going to slip a little bit, but we're still moving forward, but we're not going to move to the next phase unless we're confident that we're at a point that we can go into SIT 1 testing with a system that we've got the data and the capability to be able to do what the system integration testing is supposed to be. And that's what we're looking at on a daily basis.
Questions from the members about the interim meeting?
I did not have much experience with PeopleSoft, but I heard far and wide the reputation of the problems with it, and I want a system that works. And so whatever we need to do to get the system up and operating well, if we can phase in some of the enterprise, that's, from my point of view, that's fine. I'm not sure they all want to come in anyway, but that's a whole other story. But we need a 4-star system to go forward, and not a 2-star that we're fighting for. My point.
I'll take 3.
Melvin?
Compromise.
Anything else? Pete?
No.
Thank you, Zed.
You bet.
Thank you, Alder. This meeting's over with.